Go ahead.
Okay, our mission. Helping Parents Heal is a nonprofit organization dedicated to assisting bereaved parents to become shining light parents by providing support and resources to aid in the healing process. We go a step beyond other groups by allowing the open discussion of spiritual experiences and evidence for the afterlife in a non-dogmatic way. Affiliate groups welcome everyone, regardless of religious or non-religious background, and allow for open dialogue. Attendance today at this meeting is voluntary, and we are here for the benefit of learning from and sharing with other parents whose child has passed away. It is understood that our discussions are intended to be confidential and not designed to replace traditional therapy or spiritual counseling. Helping Parents Heal offers a wide variety of speakers to allow parents to be informed about many possible ways to heal, to connect with their children, and to learn about the afterlife. The views expressed by our guests do not necessarily reflect those of Helping Parents Heal, and we ask that you take from their presentations whatever may benefit you personally. And on a personal note, I had a Lives Between Live regression with Dr. Backman at an afterlife conference in 2016, and it was absolutely amazing and incredible. I've listened to that recording just recently, and it just blows my mind to hear what I learned about myself, about my relationship with my daughter Carly in past lives, and it just brought tremendous comfort. So I'm very much looking forward to having Linda share with everyone tonight. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Irene. And I am so grateful to Lindsay, who reminded us that it's going to be Jeanette Moray of the Ben Spells project. So that's who we're having on Thursday. So thank you for doing that, Lindsay. And I'm going to go ahead and read Dr. Backman's bio. She's a psychologist, researcher, author, and hypnotic regression therapist. And she's been in private practice for over 40 years. Through hypnotic regression, she has guided thousands of clients to access their past lives and the time between lives, helping them to surface and understand the challenges of their souls, which are repeated life to life. Dr. Backman regularly conducts training courses on past life and between lives regression. Convinced that our collective healing has an impact on the evolution of humanity and the unity of all peoples, she has made the understanding of the soul her priority. Dr. Backman is a frequent guest on many radio shows and has been featured as a reincarnation expert on the Dr. Oz program. She frequently conducts workshops and makes presentations throughout the United States and abroad, and continues to deepen her understanding of human evolution and consciousness through her ongoing regression practice. She has been an adjunct faculty member at the Northern Arizona University. Dr. Backman founded the RavenHeart Center in Boulder, Colorado in 1997, where she regularly teaches the practice of soul regression hypnotherapy to practitioners. She is deeply focused on the development of a universal understanding and awareness of soul evolution. Dr. Backman is the author of Bringing Your Soul to Light, 2009, The Evolving Soul in 2014, and Souls on Earth, 2018. Her books have been translated into several languages. For more information about Dr. Backman, please visit www.ravenheartcenter.com. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Backman.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. Yes. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Well, I am so excited that you are, and we would love to hear more about past life regression and the time between lives as well. And so I don't know if maybe you could explain exactly what this means to some of the parents who have never even experienced anything like this.
That's great. I think that's a great place to start. And actually, because it feels like it'll help me kind of normalize me with that lovely but long introduction. I want to just briefly tell all of you a little bit about me and how I believe that this group is sort of like, you know, fits together like hand and glove for me. So let me see if I can make this short. So long ago, when I was in my 20s, my husband and I experienced the premature birth and short life of our second baby. We were in our middle 20s. And so we, I want to say we were forced into, I don't think we're ever forced into, we learned about grief long ago, 40, whatever it is, for about 48 years ago, through the challenging pregnancy that I went through with our second child. And then that baby was born basically a third of a pregnancy early. That baby was born at 26 weeks. He lived a short while. We named him Adam. Adam lived a few hours and died. I was not a psychologist back then. I didn't understand the grief process back then, and I certainly knew nothing about the soul. So that's kind of where this whole journey for me and my husband and our family was put in motion. So about 6 weeks, and I don't typically share this, but for all of you wonderful and people who have walked the journey of the death of a child, this feels just really pertinent. So at age 25, I learned what grief over significant loss, and in particular the passing of a child, felt like. And 6 weeks after the birth and death of our second baby that we named Adam, I was in a classic place of depression, a classic place of what later on I became a psychologist, but I was in a place of thinking that in some ways my world was coming to an end. Thank goodness I did find a really wonderful therapist, and that helped me kind of dive into understanding that I was grieving. I didn't yet understand the soul, but after, I don't know, 9 months, 15 months of ongoing psychotherapy, formal, traditional counseling, I kind of righted myself again, and we went on to have another child. We have 2 grown married children and grandchildren. But back then in my 20s, I realized that there were very few people that could talk to me. I mean, you know, backtrack everybody to many years ago. There were very few people that could say to me, Linda, you're not losing your mind. You've had, and this is the way I like to put it, perhaps the most difficult grief experience that anyone has to go through, and that's the passing of a child. And you're not going crazy, you're not losing your mind. You have to grieve, and this is a difficult challenge. And so that was extremely helpful for me. And but before I got into soul level work, as you've mentioned, Elizabeth, I went back to school after that, and I first got my master's degree and then my doctoral degree and became a psychologist. And I did lots of different types of psychological work with people, but my passion was grief work. My passion was how do we get through grieving? I actually co-founded an agency that still exists for families who've had a child die, and back then I was living in North Carolina. I co-founded an agency in Charlotte, North Carolina. Then, okay, so moving forward, I'm not 25, I'm not 35, I'm well beyond that. In my middle 40s, I was practicing as a psychologist, doing all types of psychological work with people. And then I had another grief experience, and that in 1993 was the death of my original psychologist colleague and friend, a man who was about 14 years younger than I, who at the age of 32 died of a type of lung cancer. And again, the doors kind of flung open for me, and I began to sense his presence, which really shocked me back then, 27 plus years ago. I could sense him talking to me. And I barely understood reincarnation, but I felt his presence, I felt his communication, and he began to show me past lives we had shared together as a soul. And at first I thought, this is the craziest thing in the world. Maybe, maybe Linda Backman needs a psychologist of her own. Maybe she needs medication, what's going on? But long story short, I came to understand that what was going on is that I'd had a soul level relationship with my colleague for a long, long time, going back into even prior lives. And that led me into the work of understanding, who are we as a soul? Why do we come into body? How do we plan our lives? As one of the famous books on grieving and loss says, why do good things happen to, why do bad things happen to good people? Very old book that some of you may have read. And I started doing soul level work with clients to understand relationships, traumas, how do you plan your current life, et cetera, et cetera. But my heart began in the place of grief work and understanding. So I just thought that was really important to put that out to all of you. That was my original impetus to do what I do today. Yeah.
That's beautiful. And so that's the original impetus, but it's so fascinating to learn more about exactly what goes on in these past life regressions. Could you maybe explain this so that people understand, first of all, what it entails and what it brings to our lives when we are able to understand what went on before?
That's a great question, Elizabeth. So the foundation of understanding past lives and our soul is to understand, and this is what comes from, for me, 25, 26 years of guiding regression work. As a soul, we come into body on earth and we're required to grow and learn and evolve. So it's like, just like children all over the world, in most developed countries, you're required to go to school. The soul comes into body and is required to learn. And that learning can be choppy. That learning can be challenging because for one thing, one of the unique qualities of incarnating in a body on earth is that we're given free will. So it doesn't matter what your plan was. We all do come into body with a plan, but we can go against that plan. We can use free will and go against that plan. So some of you might be wondering, and it'd be beautiful, we could listen to each and every one of you, but I realize there's a lot of you out there listening. As we plan our lives, let me just first say that the notion of reincarnation, lifetime to lifetime, growing and evolving, is not anti-religion. So it doesn't necessarily negate Christianity or Judaism, Western religions, Christianity, the Muslim tradition, and Judaism, because all of those traditions based on Abraham, all had early roots in understanding reincarnation. Those belief systems got sort of wiped away in the first 300 to 500 years post-crucifixion. So understanding the soul and evolving isn't anti-religion. And most of you, I'm sure, know about Eastern religion. Eastern religion has believed in reincarnation from their inception. So as a soul, we come into body to learn, to grow and evolve. We make choices. Obviously, one of the difficult choices that each and every one of us on this call, and when I say choice, I'm talking about at the soul level, not necessarily at the human level, is that everyone in this group, including me, has experienced the death, the passing of a child. So how does that connect, to kind of come around to Elizabeth, your question? How does that relate to past lives and in between? And I'll explain what I mean by in between. When I guide a past life regression, what I'm doing is guiding a client intuitively to discover, it's usually one past life in one regression, and it's a past life in detail, meaning what happened? Who were the people that were important to me? What were the circumstances that happened? What did I learn? And let me see how to say this so it's clear. What accomplishments, what evolutionary steps did I take? Did I clean up a relationship with a soul that I'd had past lives before? Did I clean up a behavior where perhaps I was more into my own needs than my children's needs, or more into my own needs than my life partner's needs? Did I have a loss issue early on in my past life? And then, this is actually a common thread in regression work, did I have a loss of a child, a life partner, somebody important to me in a past life? And instead of working to find a way to move forward, I fell into deep grief and almost like a permanent place of kind of, not literally, but figuratively, pulling the covers up over my head and never moving forward in that past life. And that's actually a common thread that shows up in regression. So what did I accomplish in a past life that I could bring those skills forward? What not so great choices did I make from a human perspective in a past life that today I can balance? So that's the value and the beauty of discovering past lives. The longer regression that I guide is called between lives soul regression. It's discovering a past life, using your intuition with my support and guidance. We all are more intuitive than we think we are, usually. And then we move through the past life scene by scene by scene. We go all the way to the final scene, to the scene of dying. As the client, you experience that natural process where your soul steps out of your body at the ending of a life, and the soul leaving the body, no matter how we die. I don't care whether it's old age, an accident, a disease process, and including a choice, meaning taking our own life. The soul automatically and naturally leaves the body once the body is no longer functioning and returns to the higher realm, returns to the soul realm, where the remainder of our soul energy is always in spirit. And then we learn who are our guides, how did we plan our current life, who are the souls we've known before, why did we choose to come into body, and all kinds of pieces and parts that each client will learn. And that's a longer regression called a between lives soul regression. So that's a long-winded answer. So let me stop at that point and let you,
Yes,
Irene,
there are lots of questions. That's amazing. And it's interesting because there's a question that is being asked by Lindsay, and she's saying, can all of us experience past lives? And then she was asking, and how do we do it? I would assume that this is under hypnosis, but could you maybe explain a little bit more about whether or not everybody here could do something like this, and
Yes.
And how it's done?
Yes. Well, first, let me normalize hypnosis, because a lot of people will say, oh, that feels spooky and weird, and maybe it won't work for me. And that's an extremely common concern. So hypnosis is relaxation. It's nothing more than that. Every day of our lives, when we naturally relax on our own, whether it's listening to music or watching TV or drinking, a glass of wine or a cup of tea or whatever, the cycles per second, if you're hooked up to EEG equipment, which of course you're not, but every day of our life when we relax, naturally, the cycles per second of your brain slow down. when that CPS of your brain slows down, this right hemisphere of our brains becomes more active and more open. And this is our intuitive capabilities exist in the right side versus the left. This is the intellectual linear side of our brain, left side. Right side is spiritual, creative, intuitive side of our brain, emotion-based side of our brain. So it's just relaxation. I would say that maybe 1% of all the clients that I guide have any difficulty allowing that intuitive process to work. We all have past lives. We wouldn't be in body if we hadn't had past lives. Now, some of you may say, oh, but Linda, I'm a very young soul, and I think maybe I've never had past lives. I'll just say, oftentimes, as bereaved parents that we all are, it's very common for bereaved parents to be experienced or evolved souls, not young souls, because for some reason you've been, I don't want to say you chose this process, but often experienced souls are supporting other experienced souls. Often that child of ours is an experienced soul, and they're learning and we're learning. But I would say 99% of the time, clients that I guide have no difficulty accessing their intuition and past lives. Yeah.
That's beautiful. There's so many great questions here, and I can't wait to ask them. So Doug is saying, hi, Linda, thank you for being with us tonight. I read your book, watched your videos, and recently attempted a PLSR with a protege of yours. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to enter a trance state. Perhaps this was due to my deep grief I have for my daughter who passed 18 months ago. I desperately want to understand what the issues from past lives that might be affecting my current life, but now I'm fearful to try to do one again because of the first unsuccessful attempt. Do you have any suggestions for that?
Yes, a couple of suggestions. One would be to have some kind of regular, what I call spiritual practice. Spiritual practice, now most people think, oh, Linda means meditation. Linda means I need to take 30 minutes to an hour a day to meditate. That's not necessarily what I mean. It means finding some mode, if you don't yet have it, finding some mode of relaxation. It could be walking, it could be staring into the flame of a candle, it could be a prayer, a mantra, it could be nature, but using some regular practice, preferably daily, even for 10 or 15 minutes, to just trust that you relax and open up. If I was going to work with someone who said, I had what I call a PLSR, past life soul regression, and since you, Doug, are using that terminology, well, you said it's a person that trained with me, that is my terminology. It may be that that person you had it with is relatively new to guiding regression, and I don't mean to negate any of the skills of whoever that was. So that's a possibility of they're new at guiding a client. Also, it would be, one option would be me spending, an hour to an hour and a half just guiding relaxation first for the sake of learning to do that, and then scheduling a PLSR. But I'm being completely candid. Only about 1% of all the people I work with have any difficulty receiving intuition. Some of it is really understanding intuition. Intuition isn't always visual. So we're not always getting pictures like of a past life. We might be feeling the emotions of the past life and no pictures. We might be feeling sensations in our current body that relate to what's going on in the past life person's body. And sometimes we get the information through what we might call thoughts or cognition, words, phrases, sentences, just something more on the mental side, because as a human, we tend to be mental. So those are the kind of things I work with people about in regard to regression.
Well, the follow-up question that Doug has is, are you offering past life and in between life soul regression sessions? Are you doing that right now, Linda?
Yes, the answer is yes. I'm actually guiding both on Zoom, but also I'm not traveling. I typically travel about 50% of the time for obvious reasons. I'm not traveling right now, but I offer both types of regressions on Zoom, as well as long as you fit the guidelines of you've been really safe from COVID and you're really following all those guidelines of not being out and about a whole lot. I am seeing a few clients. This is actually my home office, right where I am right now. I am seeing a few clients who fit those guidelines actually in person here in my Boulder. I live in Boulder County as opposed to live in the city of Boulder. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Also, we have so many other really interesting questions. Andrea is saying, do we switch roles with our loved ones in the past lives? Is that something that you see? Or?
Yes, absolutely. I would say, not to make it just totally black and white, but usually our children have been our parents. Our parents often have been our children. Our best friends have been our parents, our grandparents. If everybody, if you think about who are those people in your life that you either feel the most connected to, or, and it's always important to think about the opposite. So who are the people in your life that you feel the most connected to? Whether they're blood relatives, friends, mentors, whoever. Strongest connections, strongest, most oppositional relationships, so think both ends of the spectrum. Who are those relationships? Who are those people with whom you've had current life relationships where you just had so much trouble fitting together in a cohesive style? Those are also probably past lives. But yes, we trade places is the answer.
That's very interesting. Sherry is asking another very good question. Has everyone had past lives, or could this be our first life?
It's very uncommon for it to be your first life, especially when you're struggling and dealing with the loss of a child. Now, to expand the concept, and this may or may not shock some of you, we can have, how to say this simply, this may be your first life on Earth. Some of us have had past lives somewhere other than on Earth, okay? So just to make that simple without going too far with it, I work with clients and have learned over the years, relatively speaking, there are three, we might say, three types of souls, or three souls, better said, three groups of souls who have different intentions of where they incarnate. There are souls that primarily are designed to incarnate on Earth. Okay? All these souls are created in the higher realm at a higher frequency. Call it God, call it the creator, call it the source. There are souls that are created primarily to incarnate on Earth. There are souls created primarily to incarnate other than on Earth, but occasionally you come to Earth. And there are souls created in the angelic realm who don't incarnate very often at all, but occasionally come to Earth to bring that wisdom of the angelic realm. So if I work with a client and it turns out maybe this is their first or second or fourth or fifth life on Earth, usually those are clients that have had many lives having gained wisdom, but they gained that wisdom somewhere else in the celestial realm that wasn't Earth. Now, I don't know if that shocks some of you, or maybe doesn't shock any of you.
I think it's beautiful. I think that that's a wonderful thought. And Callison is saying something that you've actually discussed a little bit. She's asking, what are some of the common themes for bereaved parents? And is it possible that we've been bereaved before, which is something you've already mentioned? Sometimes I feel that I've done this before. So you do agree with that?
Yes, it's possible that any of us have been bereaved before, but it's also kind of the reverse. It's possible and likely that we might have had a past life where we're the person who died early, and someone, another soul that probably we incarnate with more often, moderately often, that, okay, I'll just use my own life as an example just to make this clear. So Linda as a soul and our son, Adam. It's quite likely that I'm the one who died in a past life, and Adam was left to deal with that in whatever way in his life. So that we're learning kind of both sides of the fence. Now, some of you might imagine, I'm going to expand this just a little bit. Maybe this fits into a question of somebody else's. And I'll just comment. I'm also reading things. So if you don't, I have the chat up on my screen. The answer to Dr. Michael Newton is, I studied and worked with Michael Newton, who is the person who created Life Between Lives Spiritual Regression. I worked with Michael Newton for a number of years and co-taught with him. So yes, my technique is very related to that. But what I was going to say is, when we experience the death of a child or the death of anyone that we're close to, that death might have been planned in advance. That death might not have been planned in advance. So probably lots of you know this. Sometimes, and this is all, it's like you all are highly sophisticated, experienced people. But when we're grieving, and especially if our grief is new or still very, very acute, and that can be years later, very acute. But sometimes the soul of, I just use the example of a child. Sometimes the soul of our child, as hard as this is to say, didn't plan to live any longer than premature birth. Didn't plan to live any longer than age 13 or age 22. And that oftentimes is because that child accomplished what they came in to accomplish. I know for me, having had a baby born prematurely and pass, that was not for the learning, because I've worked hard on, so why did I go through that experience? For me, why did Adam pass? It was for me to learn to deal with death and grief and loss. Now, I don't think that's necessarily the norm, so I don't want any of you to hear that's the main reason your child passed. No, not necessarily. And sometimes dying is planned. Sometimes it's unplanned. So I'll just say that that's a huge subject and a long avenue to walk down.
Okay, well, good. Thank you for that. And Jenny and Dave are asking an interesting question, and I have to say that I don't know what QAHT stands for, but I'm sure you do. How long does a session last for the Between Lives regression? Is it like QAHT? Maybe you can expound on what that means too.
Yeah, so if it's a past life regression that I'm guiding, that's 2 hours. If it's a between life soul regression, that's 3.5 hours. QAHT is the mode of regression that was developed by a woman who has passed to the other side, as has Michael Newton passed to the other side, Dolores Cannon. And I have not trained with Dolores Cannon in QAHT. I'm told by people that come for regression who either are trained in that QAHT process or they've had a regression by somebody who's trained, that it's similar and different in it's related but similar and different. But again, between life soul regression is a 3.5 hour regression. That doesn't mean the regression is 3.5 hours. You're not in regression for 3.5 hours. It's interview, planning, creating questions for the regression. Going into the regression, we're going to work with spiritual guides during the regression, and then time to process before the entire session is over, time to consciously process.
Wonderful. So Dana's asking a question about when we sleep, can we go back to the soul realms? Can we go, I guess maybe what she's talking about is go back to past lives. Is that a possibility?
Well, yes. Let me make sure everybody understands one, I think, very key concept. When you're born as a baby and you're living and breathing outside of the womb, you're alive, or we're alive, because there's a slice, a fractal, a holographic portion of our soul that energetically resides within us, and that's what causes us to be alive. We never bring 100% of our soul energy into our bodies. Our bodies, the amount of literal energy of 100% of our soul would blow the circuits of the human body. So we always have a higher self. Everybody on this call, Linda's alive, Elizabeth's alive, et cetera, with a slice, almost like a pie, where we bring a fractal or holographic slice into our bodies. The remainder of our soul is in the spiritual realm. So when we sleep, this happens a lot, to me. I bet it happens a lot to some of you. When we sleep, you might say our soul energy loosens in our bodies, and we connect much more easily with our higher self when we sleep. We can tap into past lives, as I'm sure lots of you know. You can have dreams that really are not dreams in connecting with your child on the other side. There's a lot that goes on in our sleep at a soul level, because our soul energy in our bodies doesn't leave, but kind of loosens its tether to our body.
That's beautifully said. Paula is asking, and this I think has to do with reincarnation. How can my son greet me in spirit when I leave this earth if he has gone on to another life? And I'm sure you can reassure her and let her know that that's not the case.
Paula, that's a common question. So Paula, if your son reincarnates before you pass, he never takes all of his soul energy into any incarnation, into any embodiment. Therefore, when you die, his soul energy is always available. And, I frequently, when I'm guiding regression, often when the client is crossing over from the past life and connecting at the soul level, they're met by, well, let me put this in big picture and then kind of subdivide it. Often when we pass, we're met by a spiritual guide. We usually have a team of spiritual guides. So some of our guides are souls that we've not known in current life. But in this team of guides, some of our souls are loved ones, whether it's our child, our grandparent, our sibling, our best friend. So it doesn't matter whether someone has reincarnated or not. Their soul energy is always available.
That's beautiful, and I agree 100%. Irene is saying during her between life soul regression with you, she was able to connect with her daughter, Carly, and her parents, and she was guided into previous lifetimes together with them. So I guess that this is the way that this normally happens, that you meet everyone and then you're able to go back together with this soul circle that you've had.
I think obviously it's kind of my life's work to understand the soul, but probably all of you know this, it's only this physical container that goes away. Our soul is immortal. And so our soul is always in the spiritual realm, is available. And what you, Irene, are describing is what happens for a lot of clients, especially if the soul of your child, the soul of your loved one, is aware you need the comfort, the acknowledgement, the support of mom, dad, whoever that loved one, I'm right here. I'm available. I'm supporting you. I'm there. It doesn't, if any of you ask, well, so Linda, every time you guide a regression, if it's a person who is dealing with a loss issue through the death of someone, is that loved one always going to show up when the client leaves a past life and the client crosses over? No, it isn't always going to happen. And I can't ever guarantee that to a client. I often like to say in a regression, I'm the bus driver. So I get the bus moving and I keep the bus on the road moving forward. But the content of the regression is tied to your soul, the client's soul, and your spiritual guides, which may include your child. I'm not the determiner of what comes forward in the regression, but in the between life soul regression, you come to the session with questions. You bring 5, 6 key questions that you want to receive answers for, and those questions are asked to your spiritual guides that will come forward in the between life soul regression.
That's beautiful. I have so many questions here, and we don't have a lot of time, but I'd like to ask some very important ones. First of all, is a past life regression or a between life regression, is it as effective by Zoom? Someone's asking. Would you say that it is, or?
Well, that's a great question. I used to think years ago, this is before I started guiding even past life regression on Zoom or remotely. And I tried past life regression years ago to see how it would work if it was by phone. This is actually before Zoom was created. And I found a long time ago that past life regression worked absolutely very well remotely. So to be candid, I used to only guide past life regression remotely and not between lives, the soul level regression remotely. And then when COVID began, I was getting so many requests to guide, for a while during COVID, I did not see any clients in person at all. And so I was getting so many requests, I decided to see how it went to guide a between life soul regression. And now I'm guiding a lot of BLSR on Zoom, and it works very well. Now, if you're someone that either lives in the area where I live, or you want to travel here for that kind of regression, that's always an option. As long as you kind of fit in those guidelines, that you've not been out with large groups. I mean, I've really been, I'm in my 70s. I've been following, guidelines and structure myself. So I need for you to have followed those before you come for a session. So I'm still doing some of those in-person sessions, but yes, it works very well via Zoom.
Thank you. That's good to know. And Heidi's asking, and I think that this is something that we always have a question about this, and I think it's important maybe if you could touch on this. You briefly touched on the subject of suicide. Could you explain why this happens, and have you had any experiences with any of your clients who have had a child or a loved one pass by suicide?
Well, absolutely, yes. I've been in private practice over 40 years, but I've been guiding regression about 26, 27 years. Yes, I've worked with numerous clients who've had a loved one take their own life. And so maybe one of the questions that might be going on, and why, Heidi, you asked this question, a lot of people will ask me, well, actually, let me answer this in 2 ways. First, if you've had a loved one, if perhaps a child die via suicide by taking their own life. Does that have anything to do with whether they will or will not come forward in a regression? No, it has absolutely nothing to do with that. And suicide is, I've learned a lot about what does this have to do with the soul? Does it have anything to do with the soul of someone who takes their life through suicide? Let me first say that the spiritual realm does not reject a soul. Someone dies by suicide, their soul leaves their body. The spiritual realm, over 26, 27 years, I have never had the experience with a client that guides are, sort of upset and no, this is terrible. And you might even say, keep the soul at a lower level of the spiritual realm. I do not believe that happens. Sometimes guides, in my experience with clients, sometimes guides, if there's been a death by suicide, sometimes the guides will work with that soul and help them in the future to not make that choice. Sometimes it just depends on all the circumstances. I've had clients where the guides say, we completely understand what led you to make what led the soul to make the choice of suicide, and it's perfectly acceptable. So sometimes the guide, just to make that simple, sometimes guides want that soul to understand how to not make that choice in the future, almost like a educational process, if you will. And at other times, it's like a complete, we understand why you needed to do this. We understand why you'd gotten to the point in your life where this was the choice and this is acceptable. Now, does that mean it's easy for any of us as parents? Of course not. But it's never like, okay, gates are locked, can't come in. I've never had that experience in almost 27 years of regression.
And we haven't either. I've never heard of that ever being the case. And thank you for saying that. And Sherry's asking a really interesting question. Do we have to keep coming back, or can we say, okay, I'm done? And if so, what effect would that have on the others in our soul circle, for instance, our son?
Yeah, Sherry, that's a really common question, and a good question. Two important things to say. When we are in body and we have a higher self, our higher self in the spiritual realm has roles and responsibilities. So who are the souls that help try to guide humanity? Who are the souls that try to, guide us individually and guide us in groups? Our higher self has roles and responsibilities. So I have a lot of people saying, well, I need to be done. Coming into body on earth is hard. Incarnation is hard. Can I just say that I'm done? That has to do with, where are you in your soul's evolution? Where are you in the process of growing and learning as a soul? And if your guides, if in discussion with your guides after an incarnation, you can decide together there will be no more incarnations. But everybody, please absorb, because I have no doubt this is true. When you're finished with incarnation, you are not hanging out, getting to eat pizza and ice cream and, leisurely, because if you're finished with incarnations, you are an extremely wise, evolved soul, and your wisdom is needed to serve as a guide from the spiritual realm.
So you're spending time teaching. So,
right, exactly.
So there's another interesting question here from Kristen. She's asking, how have you come to your knowing about the soul? Was this through meditation, hypnotherapy, or something different than that?
Kristen, I'm really glad you're asking that. No, my knowledge about the soul comes from almost 27 years of guiding clients, along with what I learned when I had a mentor years ago. So what I'm telling you isn't what I pulled in intuitively or kind of plucked, or what I wanted to believe. What I'm sharing with you is what began years ago with my original couple of original teachers. It comes from client after client after client, on and on and on. And fitting together, 10 clients have talked to me about this, or 15 clients said, relatively speaking, the same thing. That's where the knowledge comes from.
That's beautiful. I think that we have just a little bit more time, but this question's fascinating. Blanca is, and maybe we could wrap up with this, and if you have anything more to say. I read that in order to learn, we have to experience opposites. So in order to learn acceptance, we have to experience rejection. Is it really necessary to learn by suffering so much?
The answer is yes. I mean, if you think about, for any of us, think about a relationship in your life that you value so strongly, whether it's family, friend, marital, romantic, whatever. And this is probably an obvious answer to all of you. We learn by tripping and falling. We learn by, I'm remembering a client's statement in my head right now. We learn by learning how not to be. And so that might be because there's a relationship that's almost like sandpaper, and we grow and learn through a difficult relationship. So maybe it's, we've all done things we wish we hadn't done in past lives. We've all played both sides of the fence. We've been the victim, we've been the persecutor. But we also learn by coming into difficult relationships. I'm thinking about a client who went into a past life, and she, by today's standards, though it was years ago, in the past life long ago, by today's standards, we would call her mother, the relationship with the client who's the child, the mother was abusive. One of the things the client says is, I learned how not to be by experience that behavior. So do we have to learn through extreme suffering? Not necessarily, but it's the way. Just think about any of us, including myself, when we get into conflict with someone, we learn how not to be. So can we also learn through, let me flip it over, through experiencing deep love and compassion from someone that isn't conflict? Absolutely, we can learn by being in relationship with someone who's a deeply loving, compassionate person. So we learn in many different ways is probably the best answer. Yeah.
Could I ask one last question as we're
Sure.
wrapping up? I'm
Yeah.
very fascinated to about this, and I would like to know, are there any people who experience past lives who come back and actually wish that they hadn't experienced that wasn't something that was as healing as it could be to them because of the fact that they've learned things? I've actually gone back with someone that wasn't you, and I found out some really, really sad things in my past. Is that something that happens, or is it mostly all for a reason and you understand that reason and you maybe,
Yeah.
and maybe the experience that I had was not done the way that it should have been. And so I guess I'm just wondering, is that ever a result of a past life regression?
Well, my response to that, Elizabeth, is that if you discover a past life, whether it's spontaneously, and there are ways to discover our past lives without regression. If we discover a past life either in a regression or in some other manner, our soul and our guides have agreed to allow that to come forward.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it's challenging information, for some reason, our soul and our guides decided that was pertinent. But along with that, just a quick comment is, because I don't want anyone to go away from listening to us talk about past life regression and think that every time you discover a past life, it's going to be traumatic and awful and challenging to deal with. That's not true. A lot of clients will discover a past life that is something that is positive and was an accomplishment and was a fulfilling past life. So please accept, if you will, everybody, that we only receive the information that our soul and our guides have decided would be useful. And a past life regression always has to include the regression therapist working with the client to work with the information and understand why it came forward and what the benefit is.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, the reason that I'm saying this, and I think it's fascinating when I look back on it, is that I found out that I was out on the Pioneer here in the Wild West. Everyone else in my family had passed. I was by myself. My whole family was actually gone, and I was struggling to get by because we didn't have very much. And so, and I was fairly young at the time. And that was the only one that I went back to. And I actually kind of wonder, well, is this the reason that I'm in this position now? Because I'm trying to move forward and make sure that everyone heals from this kind of thing. But I don't know for sure. And as I say, it might have been just a random thing that happened. But it was
Right.
fascinating to me that might have been something that I have already lived through that was very hard. So
Yeah.
anyway, but life is much better now, obviously.
Good. That's
so that's
great.
a good thing.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, I am just really interested by everything that you had to say. I wish that we could answer all of the questions that we have in the chat box. We have more, but are you available if people are wanting to reach out to you through your website? Is that something that people can do? And
Absolutely. Yeah.
and then obviously
Absolutely.
you have 3 wonderful books that are out as well. So I will make sure that I have that information in the YouTube video. And thank you so much for coming to speak to us this evening. I really appreciate
Totally my pleasure. And I might just very, very quickly add, Elizabeth, that if people go look at my website, I know not only guide regression, which obviously I do, I also guide what I call spiritual mentoring, which is just simply a type of counseling based on who you are as a soul. And then people will find virtual courses that I've either already taught that you can access or upcoming courses. But I do what I call spiritual mentoring, which is helping you from a counseling perspective, but it's based on who you are as a soul. And so I guide that, which is not regression.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And thank you for being here from Boulder, which is a beautiful place. And thank you all for being on here as well. Tomorrow, obviously, we have Becky Ostel-Clausen. And if you guys are wanting to learn about near-death experiences, she'll be talking about that. Then we have Jeanette Mare, who's coming from the Ben's Bells Foundation, as well as on Friday, we have Mabel Chun, who's one of our Shining Light parents, who's written a book about her son, Leo. So thank you all. We always make sure that everybody can unmute yourselves and say goodbye and thank you to Linda. So if you'd like to unmute, hopefully you can. Did I?
I took care of it, Elizabeth. Yeah, I had gotten
okay.
it.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you,
Thanks, Linda.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful evening, everyone. See you soon.
Thank you,
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.